Today we have a lecture on primary immunodeficiency. What's new? Our guest lecturer is Dr. Sagar Bhattad. In younger age, he has written his name in Indian medical field with his golden color. That he is the first pediatric clinical immunology and rheumatology specialist. Right now, he is working in Aster Hospital, Bangalore. He is a director in uh, primary immunodeficiency, Aster's CMI, Bangalore. And he is right now working as a treasurer in Indian Society of Primary Immunodeficiency. He written a book on primary immunodeficiency made simple. Few days back, I have shown that video, posted that video on our KAP group. He got the silver medal for MD Pediatrics. He got a gold medal for research in the pediatric lupus. He published more than 25 publications in journals nationally and internationally. Uh, our today's moderator is our handsome doctor from Kolhapur, Dr. Rahul Shinde, busy practitioner, and our president, Shishir Murugunde. I hand over to Dr. Rahul Shinde. Rahul, you can continue.
Thank you, Shishir. Thank you, Prasanna. Thank you, KFP team. Prasanna is always flirting, with anyone. Anyway, thank you for allowing me to moderate this session. As we know, we do get frequent respiratory diarrhea infections. Normal frequency of upper respiratory infections, maybe diarrhea also, in children vary from 5 to 6 per year, and upper range is 11 to 12 per year. They may be, some of them may be normal, but some of them may be unlucky. Out of them, some of are unfortunate. Okay. So it's, we are faced with this problem that we get a presentation which is atypical or dramatic course of pediatric illness. Then there are unusual twists in the pattern of disease concerning the onset, the rapid progression, the prolonged duration, or the repeated illness in that child. And this has taken a lot of misery to the patients and the relatives as well, and it has caused a lot of mental distress and turmoil for the treating pediatrician also. As we know that the disease pattern is determined by the agent, host, and the environmental interaction. We are right now talking about the host factors, the most enigmatic, as I was talking to Dr. Sagar just now, the host immune pattern. So Dr. Sagar is here to enlighten us on primary immune deficiencies. As introduced by Dr. Prasanna, he is already well trained, well versed, and already handling the sick cases which have the primary immune deficiencies. So he has, as Prasanna has already told, he has already authored a book on primary immune deficiency disorders, simplified. He would present his findings. I would request participants to post their questions in the chat box, and we'll take the questions at the end of the topic. With this introduction, I would request Dr. Sagar to go ahead with the presentation, and I request all the participants to kindly mute their audios so that the presentation is smooth, and keep on posting the questions we'll take at the end of session. Thank you. Thank you, Sagar. Please go ahead with the session.
So good evening to one and all, and I would like to thank at the outset KAP, the Kolhapur Academy of Pediatricians, who have provided this wonderful opportunity to speak this evening and address this topic. I would be sharing my screen now. I hope my screen is visible.
Ahe, visible. You are visible and audible as
Sure.
well.
Okay. Thank you. So the topic has been titled Primary Immune Deficiencies, What's New in the Field. And going through in the next 30 to 40 minutes, I would not only touch upon what is new in the field, but also try to touch upon how, as a busy pediatrician, as a practitioner, we all can diagnose these conditions. So the objectives of this presentation would be to highlight new concepts in the understanding of PIDs, the primary immune deficiencies, and to have a case-based discussion to present real-life case scenarios and show how easy it is to diagnose these conditions in day-to-day practice. So to make it simple, I would begin with this picture. We all know immune system is like the army in our body. Our army constantly protects us against our enemies, and so does the immune system of our body. To make it more interesting, what I thought is we are constantly having challenges from our neighboring countries or from our enemies. That is the first challenge that our nation faces. Now, to protect this, to protect us, we do have our army, but sometimes the army may itself turn against its own people. Not a phenomenon in India, but then sometimes in neighboring countries, you do see military coup. That may be the second challenge. And the third challenge that may arise is some people within the country turn violent and start infiltrating the country and creating problems. So these three scenarios in our body look like infections in the first, autoimmunity, wherein our immune system itself is damaging the body. And the third one is something like malignancy. And let me tell you, in all these three scenarios, the army plays a very, very important role to keep things in check. In other words, our immune system makes sure that we are not only protected against pathogens, but a healthy immune system keeps a check on autoreactive cells and prevents autoimmunity. And there is a constant cancer surveillance. Now, what does this mean? If you have an immune deficiency, you are not only predisposed to infections, but there is an increased risk of autoimmune diseases or rheumatologic diseases, and there is an increased predisposition to malignancy. So the primary immune deficiencies are better known as immune dysregulation disorders, or I would introduce the new term, inborn errors of immunity. So the new term for primary immune deficiencies today is inborn errors of immunity. We all have heard about inborn errors of metabolism, and in the last decade, there has been a phenomenal increase in understanding and diagnosis of those disorders. The next decade belongs to inborn errors of immunity. When I say the word primary immune deficiency, they are a group of genetic disorders wherein there is increased predisposition to infections, autoimmunity, and malignancy. Now, what we have understood over the last decade is that children with immune deficiencies not only present with infections, they can present with autoimmunity, and they can present with what is known as autoinflammation or the periodic fever syndromes. And this is the expanding spectrum of the inborn errors of immunity. Now, this is a recent paper published only early Jan 2020, wherein they presented the classification for primary immune deficiencies, and you can see there are 416 diseases described in this update. 64 new gene defects have been identified only in the last 2 years. That means this field is rapidly expanding. Prevalence of inborn errors of immunity is as common as 1 in 1,000 individuals. So these diseases are not rare diseases. As a group, they are quite common, much more common than cystic fibrosis, much more common than hemophilia and other diseases. Now, if you look at this paper, you would see interestingly in 1980s, there were only 50 types of primary immune deficiencies. This is the types of primary immune deficiencies. In 2007, around 150, and you could see by 2019, the number has crossed 400. So that means as molecular science is advancing, newer diseases are getting described. And so this book is only expanding. So what was not an immune deficiency 10 years ago may be an immune deficiency today. So going further, I would present few real life cases and discuss inborn errors of immunity. The first subset of cases would be those who presented with infections. And let us see how infections can be the manifestation of inborn errors of immunity. This is a 4-year-old boy, came to us with 3 episodes of pneumonia. Each time he had an episode of pneumonia, he was hospitalized and given antibiotics. He also had 2 episodes of ear discharge, and every time he received antibiotics. And this is the chest radiograph. You can see infiltrates on both the sides. Naturally, when you see children with recurrent pneumonia, there is a long list of differential diagnoses. The congenital heart defects, the aspiration syndromes, cystic fibrosis, congenital lung anomalies. So this is the differential that is usually taught in medical days, but we must also keep immune deficiency as a differential diagnosis. And in this setting, when we got an immunoglobulin profile, serum IgG, IgA, IgM, all were markedly reduced, undetectable. And the cells that produce immunoglobulins are the B cells, and the B cell count was asked for, which was absent. And this is a boy with recurrent pneumonia, absent immunoglobulins, absent B cells. This is X-linked A-gamma globulinemia, or what we call the Bruton's gamma globulinemia. This is a prototype of the B cell disorders. Children in this disease remain well for the first 6 months because transplacentally transferred IgG protects them. There is a complete absence of B cells, no immunoglobulins, and one simple clinical clue. In a boy with recurrent infections, look at the tonsils. If the tonsils are absent, you know this is X-linked A-gamma globulinemia. The message, recurrent pneumonia, one must always order serum immunoglobulins. The second case, a 2-year-old girl who was brought to my OPD almost the last year, and she weighed just 5.5 kg. She was grossly malnourished. She had recurrent diarrhea from 6 months of age and had been hospitalized at several places before she was brought to us. She also had oral thrush, and she had all signs of malnutrition. In fact, somebody thought this could be HIV, but that had been tested and it was negative. When we proceeded with the workup, you can see immunoglobulins G and A are undetectable, but the IgM is very high. So this is a disease wherein only the body is only producing IgM. We call it hyper IgM syndrome. Now, what is hyper IgM syndrome? We all know that whenever we are faced with an infection, our body produces antibodies. The first antibody that is produced is IgM, and a few weeks later, other antibodies are being produced. For example, when you ask for a serological test like a dengue or a Vidal test, you would see in the serology, after a week, you get IgM response, a few weeks later, IgG response. That is because the B cell in the body first produces IgM, and then the B cells and T cells talk to each other. After this crosstalk, other antibodies are being produced. That means for this switch to happen, class switch to happen, you need talk between T and B cells. You need CD40 ligand. So if there is a genetic mutation wherein this protein is missing, then what happens is the B cells don't talk to T cells. They keep producing IgM. Other antibodies are not produced. That's hyper IgM syndrome. Now, because IgG is not produced, these children keep getting infections. We need to give them monthly immunoglobulin infusions. The message from the second case, chronic or recurrent diarrhea, please think of an immune deficiency. Look at serum immunoglobulins. This is the third case. This is a 3-month-old boy who presented to us with fever, rapid breathing, and was diagnosed to have pneumonia. But interestingly, BCG site where the BCG was given showed swelling, and the lymph nodes, as you can see in this picture, were enlarged. In fact, the child had generalized lymphadenopathy and organomegaly. So we knew that this baby probably has not handled BCG well. This is disseminated BCG. We all understand localized adenitis with BCG can be seen in few immunocompetent children. But whenever you see a sick child with disseminated BCG, there is something wrong. Now, when we looked into the family history, it was very interesting. This is the index child who presented with disseminated BCG. The first child, who is a 3-year-old boy, also had recurrent fevers from the first year of life. He is now 3-year-old. And as you can see, multiple male members were affected in this pedigree. In fact, the mother seemed to be a carrier, and the maternal, on the maternal side, multiple male members had died, and a maternal aunt's son has been diagnosed to have spinal tuberculosis. So this looked as if this is an X-linked inheritance wherein the mother is a carrier and multiple male members are affected. So we are looking at an immune deficiency which is likely X-linked in this family. We got a study by name DHR. The dihydrorhodamine test is a test for chronic granulomatous disease, wherein you can see Master V and Master H are the younger and the elder children in the family. These are the neutrophils which are stimulated. Here you can see there is no shift. So if the neutrophils remain where they don't get shifted, that means the neutrophils are not functioning well. This is a screening test for diagnosis of chronic granulomatous disease. And we also tested the mother. The mother, you can see in this picture, shows 2 peaks. That means one group of neutrophils are normal, another are not. She is a carrier. So DHR is a very good test, not only to diagnose CGD, but you can pick up the state in the mother, especially if it is X-linked CGD. So what is chronic granulomatous disease? It is a disorder of neutrophils, where neutrophils are present, but they cannot kill intracellular organisms. So you have neutrophils, a lot in number, but they can't kill intracellular organisms because of enzyme deficiency called NADPH oxidase enzyme deficiency. These children essentially present to you with repeated suppurative infections. I'm sure you all must have seen children coming to you with recurrent suppurative lymphadenitis, children coming with non-resolving pneumonia, lung abscess, empyema, liver abscess. So whenever you see suppurative infections, think about chronic granulomatous disease. If you do an immunoglobulin profile, most of these children have hypergammaglobulinemia, very high immunoglobulins. So if you have a child with suppurative infection, high immunoglobulins, go for a NBT and a DHR test, nitroblue tetrazolium and a DHR test, you can diagnose this condition. The next case is a 7-month-old girl child from Vishakhapatnam who was referred to us 6 months back. This girl had recurrent pneumonia from 3rd month of life and had persistent oral thrush. HIV test was negative. When this girl was referred, as you can see, the chest radiograph showed pneumonia, but then this is an infant and the thymic shadow was missing. In infants, thymus is very prominent. And if you don't see thymus in an infant, this is a red herring. You should be looking for an immune deficiency. We looked at the hemogram. It showed neutrophilic leukocytosis. We thought this is sepsis, but then we should always look at the differential counts carefully. The lymphocyte count here was only L8, the absolute lymphocyte count being 1200. We all know in infants, lymphocytic predominance is the rule. Here you are getting lymphopenia. A lymphocyte count less than 3000 in an infant is lymphopenia, and persistent lymphopenia means one diagnosis, and that is severe combined immune deficiency, SCID. This is a serious immune deficiency, presents in infancy with infections, but if you look at the lymphocyte counts and if you pick up lymphopenia, we can all diagnose this condition. So SCID essentially presents in young infants with severe pneumonia, opportunistic infections like pneumocystis. They can have oral thrush. Many of these children fail to thrive. This disease is fatal. If you don't diagnose them, they essentially die in the first year. And that is why you can get a family history wherein multiple children have died in the family and the next child is brought to you. So whenever you get such a positive family history, think about SCID. Suspicion, close look at the differential counts. If there is lymphopenia, if thymus is missing on the chest radiograph, you have almost made a very crucial diagnosis. So these simple tests, which are readily available to all of us, can help diagnosing severe combined immune deficiency. So what is lymphopenia? There are cutoffs based on age. In children less than 2, it is 3000, 2 to 6 years, 1500, and more than 6 years or adults, it is 1000. These days, we, amidst the COVID pandemic, are also seeing children with multisystem inflammatory syndrome, and many of them present with lymphopenia. So it is essential to keep in mind the lymphocyte cutoff. The next case is a 4-month-old boy who presented with recurrent ear discharge. This baby was exclusively breastfed. When exclusively breastfed babies come with ear infection or lung infection, one must become cautious. This baby also had omphalitis from 2 months of age. So the umbilical site looked quite inflamed and red, and there was ear discharge, and this is the umbilical site which was kind of inflamed. And the mother also said the cord had fallen quite late. The family history was significant. A consanguineous couple, the first child had died at the age of 2 months. Again, in that child, umbilical cord had fallen only at day 45. There was omphalitis and the baby had died of sepsis, but there was no diagnosis offered in the first child. Looking at this history and looking at this CBC, you can see there is anemia, marked leukocytosis, neutrophilia, and thrombocytosis. But what was interesting is this child had persistently very high neutrophil counts. One may think of sepsis in this setting, but these neutrophil counts were too high even for sepsis. Counts which are going above 50,000 persistently mean only one diagnosis: leukocyte adhesion deficiency. And as I'm sure most of you know, delayed cord fall is a very characteristic sign in these patients. So what is leukocyte adhesion deficiency? You all know this is a bloodstream. The neutrophils flow in the bloodstream. This is the tissue. If there is a pathogen in the tissue, the leukocytes have to come out. To come out, the neutrophils adhere to the endothelium and then they come out. But for this adhesion to happen, you need this protein. If this protein is missing, neutrophils don't adhere to the endothelium. All the neutrophils are in the blood. So there is persistent neutrophilia, but there are no neutrophils in the tissue. So these children get infections. So whenever you see very high neutrophil counts, think about leukocyte adhesion deficiency. High neutrophil counts is not always sepsis. Very high neutrophil counts, think of LAD. This 6-month-old boy from Kochi presented with rashes and fever, as you can see in this picture, but this was the BCG site which was quite ulcerated. And again, this child had generalized lymphadenopathy, organomegaly. lymph node biopsy revealed culture of BCG strain. Again, a child with disseminated BCG, but then family history was significant. The father, who is 32 year old, had been treated for tuberculosis at least twice and had multiple skin lesions from young age. The paternal grandmother, the mother of this father, also had been treated for spinal tuberculosis at least thrice. So we had a family wherein the child presented with disseminated BCG and the father and the grandmother also had tuberculosis. So we knew there is something ongoing genetic. So disseminated BCG, you must think about HIV, severe combined immune deficiency, chronic granulomatous disease, and a disease by name Mendelian susceptibility to mycobacterial disease. This family, HIV had been excluded, and CGD, again DHR was normal, unlikely to be SCID because you can see the father and the grandmother are surviving into adulthood. SCID children don't survive so long. So we did genetic studies, and there was a mutation in a STAT1 gene confirming Mendelian susceptibility to mycobacterial disease. And you can see this is an autosomal dominant disease in this family. That is why the grandmother, the father, and the child, all of them had this disease. So the message from this case is that when you see disseminated BCG, think about immune deficiency. And some of these immune deficiencies are not that severe. They can survive into adulthood. This is a 7-year-old boy who presented with these kind of nails, onychomycosis. So there was fungal infections of almost all the nails for several years. This child also had recurrent oral thrush and repeated pyodermas. So you can see multiple skin infections, oral candidiasis, nail candidiasis, and very high IgE levels. Again, confirmed to have autosomal dominant hyper IgE syndrome or the Jobs syndrome, which is caused by STAT3 deficiency. But again, the message is simple. Whenever you see recurrent oral thrush or onychomycosis, think about an immune deficiency. These fungal infections are opportunistic infections. There has to be an immune defect. Coming to the second part of the talk, which I believe is again interesting, because in the last 5 to 7 years, what we have realized is immune deficiencies does not mean all about infections. I'm sure as pediatricians, when you start seeing infections, unusual or recurrent, you start thinking, could this be immune deficiency? But now the spectrum is expanding, and children with even autoimmune diseases could be immune deficiencies, monogenic immune deficiencies. So this is a 13-year-old girl from Mauritius who presented with systemic lupus at the age of 2. Now, SLE, systemic lupus, can present with malar rash, discoid rash, and alopecia as in this child. And this girl also had class 4 lupus nephritis, which had not responded to many treatment. But what is important? SLE, I also practice rheumatology. SLE commonly presents in children beyond the age of 8 or 10. Here is a girl coming with SLE at the age of 2, very early onset autoimmune disease. Family history being significant, consanguineous couple. The second girl had died of pneumococcal sepsis, meningitis and pneumonia at the age of 8. So we're wondering what is wrong? Why did SLE start so early? And why should there be a positive family history? So ANA was strongly positive, dsDNA negative. But since this was unusual, we worked up this child further. CH50 is the assay for classical complement pathway. In the complement pathway, there is a classical and an alternate pathway. And classical pathway you can assess easily by doing a CH50 assay, which was low. C1q levels, which is the first complement protein in the pathway, was markedly reduced. Genetic studies confirmed that this child had congenital complement C1q deficiency. And now you can see children with complement deficiency can present with autoimmunity. Now the second child in this family who had pneumococcal sepsis, I think also had complement deficiency, because pneumococcus is an encapsulated bacteria, and to handle encapsulated bacteria, we need opsonins, and C1q is an opsonin. So whenever you have infections with encapsulated bacteria, think about complement deficiency. So the message is, think about C1q deficiency if autoimmune diseases like lupus start very early, or if there is a family history of lupus or recurrent infections with encapsulated bacteria. So if you see a child coming with recurrent pneumococcal sepsis, you know that you will be looking at the spleen. Children with asplenia can have recurrent pneumococcal infection. Again, children with complement deficiency can have it. So think about these diseases. Message, early onset autoimmunity, please evaluate for immune deficiency. Now, next group of cases is colitis. Now, what is colitis or inflammatory bowel disease? I'm sure in your practice, some of you must have seen children coming with repeated blood-in motions, recurrent diarrhea. You would be thinking this could be dysentery, but sometimes this is so frequent you have to take opinion from a gastroenterologist. And if it is an adult coming with recurrent diarrhea, blood in stools, then one of the diagnoses would be inflammatory bowel disease. So if a child comes with presentation like IBD, recurrent blood in stools. Could this be an immune deficiency? Let us look into. A 1-year-old boy, repeated blood in stools, thrombocytopenia. So this boy has got persistently low platelet counts, blood in stools, eczema. This is Wiskott-Aldrich syndrome, a disease that is seen in boys with eczema and thrombocytopenia. Very simple clue is that whenever you see a boy with persistent thrombocytopenia, look at the mean platelet volume. If the platelets are smaller in size, this is Wiskott-Aldrich syndrome. So many of these children may be misdiagnosed as ITP in our practice. 3-year-old girl, blood in motions, recurrent pneumonia. Again, you can see there is infections, but repeated blood in stools. We did a DHR test, and you know this was abnormal. The diagnosis is chronic granulomatous disease. So you know that chronic granulomatous disease can present with recurrent blood in stools. And this is another interesting child. He came from Gujarat, 1-year-old boy, recurrent blood in motions. And when we did a endoscopy and biopsy, they said this is IBD. There is cryptitis. This is IBD, but IBD starting in the first year, very early onset IBD. Genetic studies confirmed interleukin-10 receptor deficiency. So what I want to say is, whenever you see recurrent blood in stools in a given child, this could be one of these immune deficiencies. Now, this is another interesting case. This has been shared by Dr. Devang Pandya from Rajkot, Gujarat, who has managed this child. Fantastic, I would say. A 6-year-old boy who presented at the age of 3 with type 1 diabetes mellitus, put on therapy, also noted to have hypocalcemia and low PTH, so hypoparathyroidism, so multiple endocrine issues, then developed chronic diarrhea. And because of the diarrhea, he was worked up, and this diarrhea eventually responded only to steroids. So this is autoimmune enteropathy, and this child now presents with multiple joints which are swollen, polyarthritis. Now, when Dr. Devang called me, we realized that this boy has got polyautoimmunity, multiple autoimmune issues, polyarthritis, autoimmune enteropathy. Also, enteropathy was the predominant feature, and multiple endocrine issues. So whenever you see polyautoimmunity, one must know that there are cells called T regulatory cells in our body, which protect us against autoimmune diseases. So probably this child has a defect in T regulatory cells. Probably the Treg cells are not doing the job properly. We got genetic studies done and a mutation in the LRBA gene. This is LRBA deficiency. Let me tell you, these diseases are new. This disease has been described only in this decade, and we now have a child with LRBA deficiency who probably will need a bone marrow transplant. But what I want to tell you is, PIDs is not all about infections. When you see a lot of autoimmunity, you can think about these PIDs. Now, another case with lymphoproliferation, lot of lymphadenopathy and organomegaly. Let us look at this. A child from North Karnataka, a 3-year-old boy, comes with multiple enlarged cervical nodes from young age. From 2.5 months of age, cervical nodes were enlarged. And then for last 6 months, these nodes got increased further. There was generalized lymphadenopathy and splenomegaly. So when we investigated, because of ongoing lymphadenopathy or organomegaly, HIV was negative. The liver function showed a reversal of AG ratio and immunoglobulin profile, hypergammaglobulinemia, high IgG. So one thought this could be tuberculosis, this could be lymphoma, although the story was too long for a lymphoma. A lymph node biopsy was done, which was reactive. Now, we have a child who's got long-standing lymphadenopathy, organomegaly, what this could be. So chronic non-malignant lymphoproliferation, high immunoglobulins, no infections. This could be autoimmune lymphoproliferative syndrome, what we call ALPS. Is a genetic disorder wherein there is defect in apoptosis. The cells are not dying, so lymphocytes increase in number, infiltrate the organs, produce lymphadenopathy and organomegaly. So how do you diagnose this condition? A simple flow cytometry based test. These T cells are CD3 positive. Normally all T cells are 3 positive. Some of them are 4 positive and some of them are 8 positive. That is the normal profile. You have CD4 cells and you have CD8 cells. But in this condition, a group of cells called double negative T cells, which are negative for both 4 and 8, are markedly elevated. And if you get this test done, you can diagnose this condition. And the biopsy also showed, the lymph node biopsy also showed that there were DNT cells in the lymph node biopsy. This is a genetic disorder, again will need immunomodulation. The last case, malignancies. So we all know that sometimes we do come across children with leukemias and lymphomas. Can these be PIDs? So this is a 15-year-old boy, comes to us with fever for 2 weeks, generalized lymphadenopathy and organomegaly. Biopsy confirms non-Hodgkin's lymphoma. This child is put on chemotherapy, unfortunately dies out of sepsis. Now this looks like a usual story of a child with lymphoma, but the past history was significant. This child had recurrent pneumonia from a young age, one episode of septic arthritis, ongoing eczema and recurrent bleeds, persistent thrombocytopenia. In fact, this child had been already diagnosed with Wiskott-Aldrich syndrome, had been put on monthly immunoglobulin infusions. These children should be transplanted, and the family had been counseled many times for a BMT. Unfortunately, they could not proceed further, and this boy landed up with lymphoma and died. So what is the message? The message is that some of these immune deficiencies, even if they look well, they may proceed to develop lymphomas in the second decade, especially combined immune deficiency in the second decade. And hence, whenever these children are fit, they should be transplanted. So in the last 3 years of my practice in Bangalore, I would say I have been blessed to be in a team of, in a large team of pediatricians at Aster CMI, one of the large departments in Bangalore. And with their support and with the referrals across several southern states, we have a collection of 135 cases with primary. These highlighted in red are very unique diseases described for the first time from our country. So I strongly believe these diseases are not rare. We diagnose almost and have now undergone a bone marrow transplant in the hospital. You can see Dr. Stalin, the transplanter here, and a child with LAD, children with SCID, child with CGD. They have been transplanted, and most of these children are doing fine. So while some of these children need immunoglobulin infusions, others need transplant, and these facilities are now defects like the chronic granulomatous disease, and fourth is the complement deficiency. So world over, the world literature states most common group is the B cell disorders, the hypogammaglobulinemia. However, at our center, as you could see, a good proportion of severe combined immune deficiencies are also being diagnosed. Complement deficiencies are the least common of this group, but probably we are missing them.
Thank you, Sagar. You almost told many of the findings, but we usually get unusual infections, unusual course of infection, recurrent diarrhea, failure to thrive. Would you like to suggest the pediatrician like some other signs, like basic skin stigmata or eye changes or nail change? You already described those. Any other things okay, they can think about, like you for the early diagnosis, other peripheral things or the other systemic things? Would you like to suggest few clinical signs in those aspects?
So I would say I would answer your question in two parts. One, where I would not do a workup for immune deficiency. Number one, recurrent viral fevers. Child is thriving well, I would not investigate. And another area probably is urinary tract infection, usually have a local cause like vesico-ureteric reflux or posterior urethral wall. So again, UTI is not one place wherein we would be probably looking at immune deficiency. Now, what are the usual places where we should look for? I would say second episode of pneumonia that requires antibiotics, especially IV antibiotics. Yes, we must investigate. Recurrent ear discharge. We don't have a clear number, but I would say if there are multiple unusually episodes of ear infections, we will investigate. Skin infections, if a child is thriving well, only coming with pyoderma, then I would be a little cautious before investigating. Here, I would probably look at the sites like the nose or those areas where you have carriage of Staphylococcus aureus. So that is the first thing I would like to do in children with isolated pyoderma. But if there is no carriage and this child continues to have skin infections and skin issues, we will probably investigate that child. Also highlighted was the fact the recurrent diarrhea, especially not a single episode of diarrhea or the second episode, but somebody coming with persistent prolonged diarrhea, failure to thrive, yes, must be investigated. The other important thing for a clinician is the family history. As you could see in most of my cases, there is a family history and sometimes we miss it in the beginning. So a good family history would always help us to pick up these cases early.
Thank you, Sagar. The other question which we got, can you suggest some initial battery of tests? The parents are worried that this child is not doing well, and we are also worried that this child is getting frequent infections. To screen these kids early, do you suggest any pattern of test, or you should look into CBC some kind of thing, or maybe at 6 months, would you like to suggest some screening test for these kids, or maybe the kids which we get which are bit unusual or maybe unlucky, or those who are getting recurrent infections?
So, sir, I would not say that there is one test which will answer all our questions. But then, as you rightly said, if I'm concerned, the very first thing I would do is probably a CBC, look at the neutrophil count, lymphocyte count, and platelet count. If there is persistently low platelet count in a boy, I would be concerned about Wiskott-Aldrich syndrome, number one. In an infant or a young child, if there is persistent low lymphocyte counts, as I showed, I will be very concerned. I will proceed further with immunoglobulins and other T cell, B cell counts. In the same way, neutrophil counts, there is no reason why somebody should have recurrent neutropenia or persistent neutropenia. One episode of neutropenia is fine, but if you have second episode of neutropenia, I would be very concerned. So that is number one. Now, there is no universal screening, but then I think to begin with, if you are seeing sinopulmonary infection, recurrent sinusitis or recurrent pneumonia, immunoglobulin profile is a very handy test. Is easily available, very cost effective. I would want to quote the cost because some of us have that hindrance. In Bangalore, immunoglobulin profile is available at say 1100 rupees, IgG-AM. So this serum immunoglobulins is easily available, and whenever we are concerned, we can do it. But a word of caution, please remember number one, that age norms, we should always look at the age norms. Many laboratories just give the adult norms, which may not be right for a given child. And second thing is immunoglobulins, if they are very low, you are likely looking at some problem. But if they are normal, then you have not excluded all immune deficiencies. So we probably have only excluded the B cell defect, but not the other disorders. That should be kept in mind. Also in the book which I was talking, I have tried to give a table wherein what investigations to be sent. Like I want to send immunoglobulin. Should I send a serum sample or a EDTA sample? Very basic question. And should I store this sample or should I send this sample immediately to the laboratory? So I think in that book, I have put a simple table so that pediatricians can look there and easily send the sample. Also the age norms for the test have been given.
Yeah, that's true. And we are really confused, which sample should be sent, and that is a really confusing part. But thank you for that. And there is a question in the chat box. The NitroBlue tetrazolium test or AHR test is done by which lab?
Okay, sir. So let me tell a few things. We are talking about a disease called chronic granulomatous disease. When will you do this test? Is when you have children with repeated suppurative infections, empyema, lung abscess, liver abscess, suppurative lymphadenitis second episode. So those children. Now, this is a disease wherein your neutrophils are not doing their job properly. The test is NBT, NitroBlue tetrazolium test. Bangalore, the test is readily available. I would quote at least one lab where I regularly collaborate is Anand Labs. And the test costs you just 300 rupees. Important thing is heparin sample, and you always send it with a healthy control. So somebody, a healthy person sample also is sent along, because they will run both the samples. Only if the control is showing normal result, we can interpret this result. And this sample has to be shipped as early as possible, preferably within 24 to 48 hours. The second test is the DHR test. It's not AHR, dihydrorhodamine test. Again, it is another test for the same disease. The sample is again heparin sample. The same lab can do it. And the cost of the test is just around 310 or 320 rupees. So these are very cost effective tests.
I would like to ask one more question. What are errors in judgment you have noticed? Some kids, they keep on developing some diseases. As an immunologist, what errors of judgment maybe the pediatrician or the referring doctor should not repeat those things? Will you suggest some things that some errors should not be done at the peripheral, or this is a kind of multidisciplinary approach, so that the pediatricians are available? I want to re-quote this question. What are the do's and don'ts, when you are handling these kinds of kids?
Sir, I think one problem with our group of patients is they probably also keep changing pediatrician. That is also a problem with these patients because they are suffering. So when they don't find answer with one pediatrician, they go to the next pediatrician. So sometimes when a kid is coming for the second or the third time, I think the first thing as a pediatrician we may have to do is give more time to this child. Unlike the usual child who does not take much time, this child will require a little bit more time on your part because his story will be slightly longer. So we need to start understanding these kids will need some more time, without which we cannot diagnose them. Second thing, what I have seen, I won't say errors, but probably eyes which are not trained are not looking into it. As simple as the differential counts. I have seen most often lymphopenia is missed because we are occupied with sepsis. So a child is sick, neutrophil count is 90%. So we feel this is all sepsis, but the lymphocyte count is only 5%. So I think as a rule, there is no value in looking total counts. We should always look only into the differential counts. Differential counts are going to tell us if there is eosinophilia, the disease is different. Lymphopenia, the disease is different. I think that is the second, I think that is a very, very important thing that we start looking at the differential counts. The third thing is, I would say platelet count. Sometimes we say it is dengue and leave it. But a child should not be coming with something like recurrent dengue or, so I've seen children being labeled like second time the child has got dengue. But then you see the platelet counts are low persistently. So such children need to be followed up. And other thing as a pediatrician, I am sure if you spend more time and take a good family history, I would say a lot of these things can be eliminated because usually the first child is not diagnosed and the suffering increases when the second child is diagnosed. So I would say these simple tests, if we can look into, we can make a difference.
Would you just highlight
Yes, sir.
In chat box, there is one question. How common is common variable combined CVID?
CVID. Okay. So the common variable immune deficiency, as the name suggests, is the commonest symptomatic immune deficiency in adults in the West. And it is quite common. We don't have any figures from Indian subcontinent because we don't have any national data, but most of these patients don't come to pediatricians. They come to pulmonologist, gastroenterologist with recurrent pneumonia, recurrent diarrhea, and weight loss. And many of them are misdiagnosed to have inflammatory bowel disease. Sometimes they end up having bronchiectasis and are labeled as idiopathic bronchiectasis. So what I can say is this disease is very common, especially in the second and third decade. And when you have patients coming with multiple chest and GI infections, one should do the immunoglobulin profile. If the IgG is low, then you are probably dealing with CVID, common variable immune deficiency.
Yeah. Thank you.
Dr. Shinde, sir, you had some question?
Dr. Rahul? Dr. Rahul, are you there?
What is the prognosis of the children?
Intervention or without doing a bone marrow transplant, this child will die. Now, when it comes with high prophylaxis, many children do very well and they grow into adults. Now, the other subset requires immunoglobulin infusions. For example, the X-linked agammaglobulinemia. Now, if you put them on IVIG, we have seen patients growing to become engineers and they attain normal potential. So they have fantastic prognosis provided they have been started on treatment on time. Now, other challenge is naturally the cost associated with treatment. Now, I should tell you that at least in Bangalore and several state governments in the country are giving free immunoglobulin infusions to most of our PID patients. So today, if you diagnose a patient, at least in Karnataka and several states, more than 10 states I know are giving free IVIG. So there is a good hope that even if you diagnose them, you will be able to give them a reasonable prognosis. Even with transplants, there are several fundraising platforms, philanthropic support with which we can support them. So as a pediatrician, whenever such a child is diagnosed, I think we should give them a positive outlook. We should not say there is no point in going further. I think we should say at least get to the diagnosis, give your best. Even if you are not able to treat your child, try getting a diagnosis. Why try getting a diagnosis? Because I have at least 5 families with SCID now. We could not help the family because they came in sick state, the babies died. But now 3 of those families have next child normal. This is because we did a genetic test was positive, and the next pregnancy, we did antenatal testing. And we said, your baby is normal, you can continue pregnancy. So in this way, we can prevent the occurrence of these diseases in next pregnancies. And if when we can do that, that is a phenomenal help to these families, because we don't want another child coming out with this disease because it is quite troublesome. So even as pediatricians, I would say getting to the diagnosis is very important. Sometimes even if we don't get to the treatment, because we can help the family as a whole.
The other one thing is like many of the treating pediatricians, the parents come and they ask for some tonics like multivitamins. Is it really rational to suggest them B complex, zinc, vitamins, vitamin D, etc.? Do you have any kind of suggestion on this kind of? I mean, these children will be worked up if you are worried. But do you suggest like the children should be, he suggested some B complex, vitamin D and all other things? Or the other way, do you find that vitamin D is on the top of the list? Do you feel that any deficiencies are causing this kind of disorders?
It is so that is malnourished. The protocol any with wherein you try to supplement them not only with adequate nutrition but with vitamin supplements. I think that is rational. But if you're asking me, a normal child who is walking in your OPD, and since we have these children are having recurrent virals, for example, which is pretty much common, not in this pandemic but otherwise. So is there a rationale in giving vitamins? I don't see any rationale. Even with vitamin D, my personal belief is it has been everywhere. How can one single thing be associated with every disease on earth? So I think the last decade belonged to vitamin C, this decade belongs to vitamin D, the next decade will belong to some other vitamin. So that is my take on it. I don't completely deny it, but you can't oversimplify saying that give this vitamin and everything is done. The other thing I commonly tell parents is that when you were young, what vitamins did you take? Most often they look back at me, what are you talking? Those days we used to have food at home. Where was vitamins? I said that applies even today. So nothing can replace a healthy diet. That is what I tell them.
Thank you so much. So can we say that there should be a very high index of suspicion? There is an exponential rise in the detection of these cases, and you should keep inborn errors of immunity in a differential diagnosis. And the high neutrophil count is not as an sepsis. Maybe that message we should carry. Then it's not only infection, think about the early rheumatoid disorders or predisposition to malignancies also. Maybe you should be more worried about recurrent blood in the stools and try to get to the diagnosis. The workup is not that expensive, and this is the key message you give, that people are kishan, or they are a bit on the back foot when it comes to workup, and we should try to work up these cases. Thank you so much, Dr. Sagar. It was very an enlightening talk. I would like to hand over my to Dr. Prasanna and if they have any say on this. Thank you so much, Sagar. Thank you so much.
From the audience, anybody want to ask the questions? They can go ahead.
Apart from my words, if you want to add something, if I have missed something, the key message, Dr. Sagar, you can please, go ahead with those messages also.
No, I think, sir, you have. Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Please, sir.
Thank you so much.
Now, I think you have aptly
question?
highlighted all the messages. I would only say that there should not be hesitancy in testing. Right now, testing facilities are available, and I would be more than happy to, even if you send me the reports, I would be more than happy to discuss the cases with you, because we have a long way to travel in these diseases.
True, this is my experience also. I have so far contacted Dr. Sagar for so many things, and he is always cooperative and he's always being given good suggestions. Even patients are willing to go to Bangalore to get the workup. Thank you so much, Sagar. Any other questions? We'd like to take the questions from the audiences also.
Dr. Sai Prasad Kautekar asked that where to put auto-inflammatory disorders.
Okay, I think that's a very good question. We will have a separate session if you are all okay on auto-inflammatory diseases. To just tell you that auto-inflammatory diseases are also immune deficiencies, number one. And if you look at the classification of immune deficiency, now the international classification has 10 classes, and one of them is immune dysregulation, the innate immune defects. That is where we have auto-inflammatory diseases. Now, what do you mean by auto-inflammatory? To make it simple, we all know autoimmune diseases, SLE, rheumatoid arthritis. These are autoimmune diseases wherein your T cells and B cells of your body have become autoreactive, and you are having autoantibodies. So we know T cells, B cells belong to the adaptive immune system. Making it simple, we also have innate immune system. The first line of defense, the neutrophils, the macrophages. Imagine a situation wherein neutrophils and macrophages have become autoreactive. Your neutrophils have to produce cytokines, but macrophages produce cytokines, but there is no infection and they are throwing cytokines like that. That is autoinflammatory disease, wherein you have persistent inflammation going on due to a problem in the neutrophils, macrophages, the innate immune system. And that is what is autoinflammatory diseases. One simple example is the periodic fever syndromes. Children coming with recurrent fevers, and we diagnose periodic fever syndrome, that is an autoinflammatory disease. But it is, again, there are 35 to 40 diseases. We can have a session on that.
Thank you. Shishir sir?
Yes, yes. Very nice session, Dr. Sagar Bhattad. But the take-home message from this talk, I think, is investigations related to primary immune disorders are not so costly, and they are easily accessible, I think. So we should use very intellectual use of these investigations, serum immunoglobulins and NBT and DHT test. So these are easily available and cost effective also, and we should use it at proper time. That is one thing. And another thing, genetic workup of these diseases is one of the recent need of ours. So we can prevent few families from disaster. So genetic workup is one need of time. That is one thing. So and we are hopeful that everyone can be communicative with Dr. Sagar, and we will have new and newer diagnosis of primary immunodeficiency disorders, and we can learn a lot from him. Thank you very much. It was really informative session today. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
And thank you for the wonderful book also. It's a really wonderful book, Dr. Sagar. And we will definitely communicate and coordinate with this disease. I think we will learn a lot from you, and we are hoping that we will get few more sessions with you. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Rahul sir. Thank you, Shishir sir. And thank you all participants for joining us. Thank you. Thank you, sir. Good night. Thank you.
Good night.
Good night.
Good night.
Thank you.
Bye. And Shishir sir, get well soon.
Yeah. Thank you. Your wishes are needed. Thank you.
Sure.
Thank you.